Hey everyone, I'm Bryan. Today, I'm going to show you how I made a miniature hot spring diorama with some recycled supplies and 3D printed materials. I started with a leftover styrofoam cube that I had cut up and textured for a different project. I don't remember what I was planning on making with this, but I found it in a box of other crafting supplies I stashed away a long time ago. There was UV resin on it, and with the dark blue and gray paint job, I guess I was trying to make some kind of underground cavern scene with a small pool of water. I repainted the entire surface with brown acrylic paint, and at this stage I only had a vague idea of what I wanted my project to look like. The longer I thought about it, the less time I had to work, so like a lot of my projects, I started painting and would figure things out as I went along. There were a lot of little pockets in the surface of the styrofoam, and I know I didn't make those with any tools, so I must have used something like acetone to partially melt the foam. I thought about spraying the entire surface with spray primer instead of painting by hand, but I remember that the accelerant in aerosol sprays melts foam. I already made that mistake with a previous project. This part may not have been necessary, but I put some hot glue around the edge near the UV resin. I planned on using clear PVA glue for the water feature of the hot spring, so a little barrier of hot glue would hopefully prevent the PVA glue from dripping down the side. I spread some dark gray paint over the surface of the foam, and I ended up using a lot of paint, but not enough to completely cover the brown paint layer as I wanted some of it to still be visible. For a little while, I thought that the tone of the gray paint was too dark and that the piece would look more like a volcanic hot spring instead of, well, I don't know. I didn't look up the different kinds of hot springs and what they actually look like. I was going off a vague memory of seeing one a long time ago. When the gray paint dried, I dry brushed some tan paint over the entire surface. I think this helped brighten the overall look of the piece, but it made everything look a little bit sandy. If I used a darker paint, I was at risk of blending with the dark colors and it being really hard to see. I mixed a batch of my texture paste using a little bit of water, some PVA glue, baking soda, and acrylic paint. I've used this concoction for many of my past projects, and I don't have a specific formula. I work based on the texture, so if I need something more fluid, I use less baking soda, but if I need something thick, I use a lot of baking soda. The fluid type dries smoother, but takes longer to do so because there is more liquid in the mixture. The thick type dries faster and holds together better, so there is more surface texture, and I can mold it into different shapes if I use enough baking soda. There are some risks to not measuring the ingredients because it is very easy to add too much baking soda, and then the mixture is too dry and won't stick to anything. In this case, I used just the right amount of everything, so I was using the mixture to fill in most of the pockets. I didn't want to slather the entire surface with the texture mix because it would look like mud afterwards. Okay, so you're probably wondering what the worm-like creatures are. These are 3D printed models of graboids, which are subterranean monsters from the Tremors movie franchise. Basically, they live underground and use their exceptional hearing to locate prey above ground and then pop out and swallow it. The Tremors franchise has 7 movies and a short-lived TV series, and they're some of my favorite pieces of media. I made a diorama using one of these graboid models last year, and I've been waiting for an opportunity to try again with a more detailed project. The iconic graboid creature is a huge worm, but it starts from a small egg that contains the larval form. The larvae were featured in the 2004 movie Tremors 4: Back to Perfection, which served as a prequel to the franchise and was set in the late 1800s. They were called dirt dragons by one of the characters in the film, and these small, fast graboids would propel themselves out of the ground to attack their prey like a missile. I'll put a link in the description to where I found the 3D models. The creator didn't call them graboids or refer to the Tremors franchise, which I assume was due to copyright reasons. I printed the models on my FDM printer that extrudes filament to create an object, but I think these models were intended to be made with a resin printer because what I printed didn't turn out very well. I painted the body of my dirt dragons brown and then painted their heads dark gray. Since the models were so small, I didn't want to overdo the paint job, which is why I left out a lot of detail like multicolor dry brushing and adding any paint washes. I also lost my miniature painting brushes somewhere, so that was a contributing factor as well. I did add a little bit of dry brushing to the models just so the colors wouldn't look too flat. I had printed the models a long time ago when I made my other video featuring Graboid, but I forgot that I used green filament at the time. I must have painted them light brown at some point, but I don't remember when that was exactly. I wanted to give the texture paste some highlight, so I tried dry brushing some dark brown paint over the surface. The texture paste was still drying, so instead of adding color, I was just smudging it and wiping off some of the material. Instead, I went back to finger painting and pressed some of the paint onto the surface. This worked out okay, but it wasn't quite what I was expecting. The water effects were made using clear PVA glue and some blue food coloring. I accidentally used too much food coloring, so the glue turned dark blue. I had to use more glue, and then I stuck the popsicle stick with it, which held enough of the blue color to slightly tint it. The reason why I chose to use PVA glue instead of UV resin is because I wanted the look of my faux water to be bubbly and lightly opaque. I know that when the glue dries, it will shrink into a thin film and practically disappear, but this effect is just for this video and hopefully it'll last long enough to get some nice pictures. The models of the Graboid eggs were a little larger than I was expecting, so only one took up most of the hot spring space. Oh, I forgot to mention why I'm using the models on a hot spring. In Tremors 4, the Graboid eggs were dormant and buried in the ground for millions of years and were reactivated by the water from a hot spring. I'm not going to debate fictional zoology, but apparently the water was enough to make the eggs hatch. It's like those dinosaur sponge toys in the thin plastic capsules that burst open when they're soaked in water. I put some more glue around the outside of the spring and trailed it towards the back edge. This may not look right, since why would water be flowing uphill and across a flat surface, but the idea is that the water starts flowing from some other part in an elevated area and then gradually overflows and pooled into the area where the eggs are located. I could have made some elevated platforms and rocks to help illustrate this a little bit better, but I didn't think of it at the time I was working at this project. Since I stuck the eggs in the glue, I figured that I would glue the Graboid larvae to the diorama too. I was going to let them be removable so I could reposition them later, but I think they fit in just the right places. When I inevitably make another project using the models of the adult Graboids, I'll do some research to try and get the right colors to match the movie versions. I only looked at a few screenshots of the dirt dragons online for this project, but since the models are so small, as I mentioned, I didn't think it mattered too much how accurate I was being with the paint job. I have all the movies on home media, and it's been a number of years since I watched any of them, so a movie marathon is in my future. I'll be sure to grab a lot of screenshots to use for references. Well, that's all I have for today. Thanks for watching my video, and stay tuned for another project next week.